We're still waiting on Senator Redd. He's en route, but I don't want to delay any longer to complete this meeting. I welcome. We're glad you're here. This is a meeting of the Senate Development Authority, Downtown Development Authority Study Committee, and if you would join me for our opening prayer. Father, we're grateful for challenges and opportunities. We're grateful for the sunshine that you've given after the storm. We ask that you provide us your wisdom and insights as we address the challenges of Georgia, and that we indeed do the best for those who we serve. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, the agenda this morning is really a committee discussion. Unfortunately, Senator Dixon can't be here and Senator Parent can't be here. We're waiting on Senator Rett. But I want to thank Senator Gooch and Senator Mullis, Leader Gooch and Chairman Mullis and Chairman Oliver for joining us today. What we're going to do is just walk through draft information, discussion information that has been exchanged via email with the committee. Basically, it's an attempt to provide a summary of the 4 meetings that we've had as a study committee. We will not take any formal action today. We will not vote on a report. The report is not yet really drafted. There's just outline recommendations and suggestions. I believe everyone has copies, at least the committee has copies of the various documents, and I guess we can make them available after the meeting so that all of you can have those as we go. But I want to first just quickly walk through.
Mr. Chairman,
sure.
Before we get started, can I have
Sure.
a point of personal
Absolutely.
7. My button wasn't working over here.
Okay.
I just want to recognize the newly appointed president. Are you president of the Georgia Economic Development Association, Mr. Grant Cagle? So thank you for being here, and I appreciate what you do. And that guy hanging around you, that Hamlin boy. And anyway,
we appreciate Mr. Cagle being here, and again, I add my congratulations to your new role with GEDA. And I think those of you who followed this committee's work since August are aware that we've engaged GEDA, we've engaged the Georgia Municipal Association, we've engaged Association of County Commissioners of Georgia and the Georgia School Board Association, along with a host of other individuals that have provided input. But anyway, I want to quickly go through just the information that I've received and that I provided to the committee. Okay, first of all, I'm going to quickly work through some preliminary findings. These are just rough bullet point outline findings. The first and most important position is that local development authorities are an invaluable component of Georgia's economic development efforts. Georgia is a pro-business state that welcomes business and industrial growth. Georgia is the #1 state in the United States to do business 9 years in a row, and the committee's intent is to support Georgia's pro-business climate.
let me take that call for you.
Yeah, would you please? It's Commissioner Boswell with DOT. We'll get back to you. Board Member Boswell with DOT. I apologize. Anytime you need a secretary, I'll turn that little jewel off.
Okay.
Thank you.
You need some crush and run.
That's right. I may need some. I need that right. But anyway, we want to recognize the fact that our local development authorities play a very critical role in the economic development of Georgia, and we support that. We've recognized that there are lots of flavors, many flavors of development authorities. We have industrial development authorities, downtown development authorities, regional development authorities, joint development authorities, payroll development authorities. There are any number of types of development parties. And they're all, the only thing I can say that would be common to them, they're all local. They tend to be created with a particular jurisdiction, either a county or a combination of counties. And there's a lot of variability between these local development authorities. By the way, at least thank you DCA for being here, information that DCA provides, the earliest active development authority that I can find still on the books in Georgia is Albany and Daugherty County's payroll development authority. that was created by a constitutional amendment in 1958. So 60 years or so. Yeah, 60 years or so. And there's been a lot since then. A lot happened in the early 1960s, and then periodically over time that has continued to work. Well, again, DCA has been an invaluable resource. We appreciate that. We have over 400 development authorities in Georgia. Regrettably, not all of these development authorities report consistently to DCA. By the way, those on the committee, you have copies of this, and if you disagree with any of these statements, please speak up. DCA has no mechanism to ensure the local development authorities reporting in a timely manner. Data provided to DCA is limited. Data has limited transparency of local development authority activity, and DCA has no oversight or enforcement role in the local development authority process. We found that there is a significant difference in large and small development authorities. Certainly our large metro county authorities oftentimes have multiple local development authorities, in some cases 20 or more within a single county. There may be competition among development authorities that share a jurisdiction. Where local development authorities derive financial support from project financing, there may be a conflict of interest in approving projects. Where executive director, staff, or board compensation is derived from project approval, there may be a conflict of interest. Smaller non-metro counties have one or very few local development authorities. Generally, smaller non-metro counties have fewer conflicts and fewer concerns. Focus is on the creative attraction of business growth, both internal and external. There has been a significant interest in local development authorities in the involvement of multifamily housing projects. As an aside, in 2021, development authorities bonded over $600 million of bonds for multifamily housing. Housing authorities bonded about $700 million. None of that's bad. I think the only thing is just to acknowledge the fact that in some counties, in some communities, you have a development authority doing housing and you have a housing authority doing housing, and that could create some challenges. We found that the training for development authority board members is required, but it's limited. Currently, there's only 8 hours of training required on an ongoing basis. Currently there's no recurring training. Chairman Oliver, you had a House bill number that would have improved that. What was that House bill number? Do you recall?
No.
I couldn't either. I thought I could put you on the spot briefly, but anyway, there was a House legislation last year that would have added some additional training expectations. That did pass the House. There was no action in the Senate, so it died, and we'll have to reconsider that. The training that development authority members receive is similar but not standardized, and it is provided by both public and private entities. There is currently no certification process for development authority board members that we are aware of. Best practices. Last time I think we looked at best practices, and we found that there are indeed a number of best practices that are available, but they are not universally implemented. Some of the best practices are, and these are not exhaustive, a memorandum of understanding with local jurisdictional entities, a pre-approved project evaluation tool that is adopted by the local development authority with input and concurrence of local jurisdictions, local development authority board member representation, including members of the local jurisdiction members. Local development authority reviews and discusses proposed project details with the impacted local jurisdiction and entities before a project is approved and submitted to final authorization. And board members serve defined terms and rotate off on a periodic basis. Those were just best practices that we gathered from some of the input. Local jurisdictional involvement. Generally, county commissions, city councils, school boards are not consistently informed on projects before a project is approved. Local jurisdictions often learn of the details and their impact late in the decision process, usually at the bond validation hearing, and local jurisdictions lack standing as an entity to provide input in a bond validation hearing. There was an issue of contractor liability. Contractors and subcontractors appear to have no legal recourse to recover expenses for projects that are unsuccessful. Contractors lack a lien interest in project technology owned by the local development authorities. 4 or 5 concerns, and then we'll go through some recommendations. Concerns are that there are no standard operating procedures for local development authorities. There's no certification process for local development authorities, their leadership, their staff, or their board members. They're limited and oftentimes inconsistent training. Board member terms expire and are often not replaced or reappointed in a timely manner, and so board members continue to serve or continue to function after their tenure expires. Boards have become entrenched in some cases, and that can create them operating more independently. Development authorities, local development authorities operate oftentimes autonomously with decisions not widely known prior to project approval. There's limited transparency, there's limited external or internal oversight, and there's no apparent mechanism to address operational concerns. Well, now what I want to do is ask Senator Gooch if he would share with the committee his recommendations moving forward. Let me get his, what's his number? 6.
Chairman, did you print out the stuff that I sent in to you?
It should be in your folder.
Is it?
There you go.
Under what tab?
Just first tab. Here you go.
Oh, this?
Document now.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Oh, there we go. I'll put my glasses on. I can read a little better. So, first of all, thank you, Chairman, for all your hard work on this committee. We've been here several times, listened to a lot of input, and what I think has come to confirm what I already knew. I think Chairman Mullis would probably echo the same sentiment, is that local governments have been very instrumental in our success in Georgia for economic development projects over the years. And what we've come to realize that we also knew is most of this was due to the fact that we have a gratuities clause in the Constitution. Most states don't have these issues because they don't have these requirements. They have a much friendlier Constitution that allows them to literally write checks to induce prospects. We've heard examples of Texas where they've written hundreds of millions of dollars to incentivize companies to move there. So we're doing it by the law, and that's what we have to do. The development authorities have been a huge part of our success over the years, and so we don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And so some of the recommendations that I brought forward, I think, are common sense suggestions that we can work toward trying to improve what currently is being done and not to hamper and get in the way of what the locals are doing. So recommendation number 1 deals with the usufruct language that we heard about with Dan McCray when he testified in our committee. Current law provides that a lease or rental agreement for real estate does not create an interest of the leasee or a tenant in the real property if the term of the lease or the rental agreement is less than 5 years. That's technically the definition of the usufruct. The leasee or the tenant only has what is called a usufruct. There is concern about a contractor's right to lien a usufruct. I recommend that legislation that would allow a development authority and a leasee or a tenant to conclusively agree that the interest of the leasee or the tenant is a usufruct if the lease or the rental agreement is security for a development authority bond, and the leasee or the tenant has a right under the lease or the rental agreement or a related option agreement to acquire fee simple title to the real estate when the bond is retired. But if they do, then a contractor can lien the lease or the rental agreement. So that was, I think, a concern we heard from the contractors, and I believe this language could be adopted in our code section fairly quickly.
Any discussion on that suggestion? Madam Chair?
I think it's a good suggestion to support it. At some point, somebody can explain to me, it doesn't have to be right now, about the priority of liens, because if the bonds have to be paid off originally, first, before the lessee gets his or her chance, seems like a pretty far down the road remedy. But I support it, and it makes sense to clarify this issue.
I would say that discussion will be properly held in the Judiciary Committee when that bill is vetted properly.
I'm assuming it's going to be resolved in a bankruptcy court somewhere. But anyway, the details of that will be.
A lot of this is dealt with already by local development authorities with performance bonds. But in the case someone doesn't require a performance bond, I think this language would protect those contractors.
We'll allow the committee to collectively consider this, and we'll have discussion via emails and phone conversations before we draft the final report for adoption, hopefully by the end of next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on to number 2.
Number 2 is basically what you've already covered, and that's the training requirements. Currently, law requires Development Authority directors and members to complete at least 8 hours of training within 12 months of their appointment to the board. An additional annual training of 2 hours for directors and board members should be implemented. In addition to Development Authority directors and members, all county and city elected officials should be required to complete the same 2-hour training on an annual basis.
Comments? I think the only comment that I recall one Development Authority executive suggest is that currently ACCG provides training on development authorities during their certification process, and it's been 20 years since I went through it, and candidly I can't recall. But I think one of the concerns they had is that the training was conducted by ACCG members, and they would like to have it considered that training at ACCG be provided by Development Authority expertise. Just a comment, just from the standpoint of being aware. And I would also say that Chairman Oliver had a bill last session that would have adjusted the training requirements and expectations, and I think if we can get that language consistent on both sides, then we can hopefully provide that as another output from the standpoint of the committee. Any comments?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
I think a lot of the trouble with training is there are not enough locations all over the state. And somehow this needs to be worked out. I agree with the proposal.
I agree with you. And
I don't know how to do it.
And I would say part of the problem with training is just physical presence.
That's
and
right.
I think
That's why you got to have more opportunities.
I think you've got to do that, or go to some online training options and some Zoom training.
Because I know our Joint Development Authority in Northwest Georgia wants to host this to bring the right
folks to the area.
Yeah, and also those testifying to that are expertise, as you mentioned too, and that would be certified or certifications. Anyway, just a thought.
I agree,
do agree with
and I think you're right. I think part
Chairman.
of the problem with training is that these are volunteers.
Yeah, right.
By and large, our Development Authority members donate their time and their expertise, and for them to be away for 24 hours from their businesses and their communities makes it difficult. So I think we can look toward other avenues for training, either online or some structured training. If we can award undergraduate degrees in a non-presence mode, we can probably.
I believe there's a half dozen different avenues. You could look at Carl Vinson Institute. Right. You could coordinate through your mountain regional commissions. There's 12 or 15 regional commissions around the state. They could coordinate that on a regional basis and make it closer to home. So I don't think that's going to be a big issue. Right. Plus, I think it's important that if these members want to serve, they need to take it seriously and know what the obligations are that they're putting in their counties and cities in. So
I agree.
Yes. Number three,
Number three.
this one deals with the transparency. I think Chairman Burns, you mentioned transparency a lot throughout this process, and this would simply require that the development authorities submit their annual registration and financial reporting to the Department of Community Affairs, detailing the development authority's fiscal activities in the previous fiscal year. This information should be posted publicly on the DCA website, so there would be basically one-stop shop. People can go and look and find that information. I'll give however, and that is, however, currently DCA does not have the funding to implement this or maintain this kind of information. So we would have to do this subject to appropriations in the General Assembly. So I would add that amendment if we could,
Okay.
that it would all be subject to appropriations. That's it.
Comments?
In relation to posting information, I think there's a bigger discussion beyond the issues we're discussing. I don't know the answer to this question. When did we start, we being the General Assembly, as policy legislation requiring a posting on a website of information? When did we legislatively start that? I don't know the answer, but at some point we've got to figure that out, because there's the filing and then there's the posting obligation.
Right.
And both of them are important. I think this is a good recommendation, but the clarity in my mind of not only giving them money, but where else are they required to do a website post? And when I say they, I mean the local people too.
So during my 8 years experience as county commissioner, we did a CAFR, and a CAFR is a much more extensive financial audit than just a general audit. Some counties still do a general audit, some do a comprehensive look. And every one of our components of that local government were audited, to include the Water Authority, the Development Authority, the Public Building Authority. All of those audits were included in that CAFR. And I would encourage counties to do that regardless of the size. So, that's just good business practice, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that would be county business anyway. It wouldn't be
That's right.
necessarily legislative business, because they're paying for county services.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Yes, sir.
These are all recommendations to the committee, and I'll ask for the committee to provide feedback and concurrence or challenges to them. I want to add a couple of three suggested recommendations. In 2013, the Department of Audits and Accounts conducted a performance review of local development authorities. I'd like for the committee to go on record as requesting that the Department of Audits and Accounts update the 2013 study and focus that on operational concerns, especially related to conflicts of interest or competition among local development authorities. Any comments on that suggestion? I've talked with the Department of Audits and Accounts, and I need to talk with the new chairman of appropriations, because I believe appropriately that would come through that request. But if it is the will of the committee, I'd like to include that as a recommendation.
You gonna have a new chairman?
I hope not.
Okay.
I've talked to the current
said
chairman,
it
and I expect him to be the future chairman, but
You said new chairman.
that's right. Well, he's going to be new. It's going to be new session, sir.
I'm
How's
just
that?
trying to get you in trouble.
I know. Don't get me in trouble. Okay. Any questions about Department of Audits and Accounts, a request to the Department of Audits and Accounts? The additional recommendations would be that we encourage that the best practices that were identified during this committee hearing be implemented by Georgia local development authorities, and that in conjunction with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, that they determine what those best practices should be and how they can best be implemented across the 400 or more development authorities that we enjoy. Any comments or questions about that suggestion? This is a best practice practices along with the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and then to provide an implementation of those best practices across development authorities. And I think that would help resolve some of the communication challenges that we've encountered or had discussed with us, where in some cases local jurisdictions are not always included. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Legally, there's the issue of standing. I would say that would be a last resort at this time. I think that if we can move forward without it, then we would be in better shape. I would hope that our local development authorities, perhaps with the lead of GEDA, they would take the lead on that, identify best practices along with the state of Georgia's Department of Economic Development, and then find a way to provide that on an implementation basis. And then my final suggestion is that we recommend that with the conclusion of this study committee, that we propose a joint House and Senate study committee on local development authorities, and that we can continue this work in a joint fashion with the House so that any legislation that might come from that could be supported by both bodies at the development stage. Any comments or questions about a joint study committee moving forward?
I think it's a very good idea, and the Chairman Darlene Taylor has had a couple of hearings, more than a couple, and we've been discussing it for a while. I appreciate that encouragement. And answer your question about what other bills there were, training bills that didn't. I think both Ron Stevens and Clay Perkle had Regional Development Authority type legislation last year in relation, touched on training, so we can go back and look at those specific proposals. I just don't remember the bill numbers.
We can certainly explore that moving forward. I want to acknowledge the fact that Senator Parent sent an email with a number of suggestions, and the committee has those suggestions. I would say that they are detailed in nature, and again deal with best practices, and they deal with accountability. And they deal with ensuring that jurisdictional entities have access to decisions by local development authorities before the decisions are finalized. I want to ask the committee to review Senator Parent's recommendations. I'm not going to go through those independently because I don't want to speak for Senator Parent, but I want each of you to review what her recommendations are, and then when we will have we'll have continuing discussions, perhaps next week at biennial individually, and then we will schedule a Zoom meeting of the committee to do a finalized report. Also, I want to point out to the committee that we have a summary paper. I'm thankful to Ms. Kaylee Maxwell, for providing us a summary report. I want to call your attention to that. It reviews what other states have done in the area of local development authorities and downtown development authorities, and the concept of bonding and the various types of bonding options, the various types of reporting requirements, and as well as the existing laws in Georgia that are relevant to development authorities and their operations. So I'll just commend that to you for your review, and then what we will do is look to finalize the committee's report and provide it to the committee probably late next week or mid next week, and then we can have a Zoom meeting to do formal adoption. And again, in summary, we have probably 4 recommendations. Senator Gooch has one dealing with lien interest by contractors who do business with local development authorities. One on training, which I think we have concurrent support for from the standpoint of prior legislation from the House. And then requirements for consistent reporting. There's a request that we do a Department of audits and accounts performance review of local development authorities, which is an update to the 2013 study, and to encourage best practices utilizing GEDA and Georgia Department of Economic Development to determine best practices and then an implementation perspective, and then the ability to create a joint House and Senate study committee on local development authorities. Are there any comments or questions relating to the information we've shared?
I'm very grateful for your work, Mr. Chair. I think this has taken our discussion that we've had in the House in really significant ways forward. I'm very grateful for that. I don't have a written history of all the legislation around development authorities since the 60s, and I have a perception that the value of that has grown significantly, and I also have a perception that we need to do some modernization of a 50 to 60-year-old statute. So I'm sure that there are interns, smart interns, that can do a history through the legislation of that. The other issue that is in the courts right now is very much related to standing, and the issue for us is to decide, do we want the court to decide that, or do we want to decide it ourselves? Because when you put that litigation issue about whether or not the school or the city has a role under the notification of the bond validation hearing, every time that's come to the court, the city or the school system has won its right before a judge, but the result is that the deal is lost because of the conflict and delay of the litigation. Well, this is an example of an issue that we've got to decide, and I think a study committee is a very good way to do that. How many cases have we? How many deals have been lost? And would you have been better off as a policy to have a formal notification or a formal opportunity to have standing in court? That's the second big issue in our highly competitive areas, in my district particularly, is the competition among development authorities. We have over 20 in DeKalb, and they're vying with each other on magnifying deals up and down North Druid Hills Road. And there has to be some way to discuss that in a way that benefits the taxpayer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy for your leadership, and we'll continue to talk about these very difficult issues.
I appreciate your input, and I think we can continue to explore the challenge of standing, either formally or informally. At the end of the day, we would like to have best practices from the industry, from the profession, address the issue, as opposed to having to deal with it legislatively. But I agree with you. We do not want to lose good projects in Georgia because of a lack of communication between jurisdictions and development authorities. I too share the concerns about competition among development authorities, mostly in our metro regions. This is mostly a metro issue. I did a little homework on just multifamily bond issuing by development authorities in 2021. In 2021, housing authorities, which would expect to do multifamily housing, we did 35 bond issues in any number of counties, totaling a little over $700 million. But development authorities, not housing authorities, development authorities did 18 development authority bond issues for multifamily housing, totaling almost $650 million. So we are in the multifamily housing environment as development authorities, or as housing authorities, or as joint development authorities, or in the metro Atlanta area as in the Urban Residential Financing Authority. So we're in that business. My concern is that Cobb County has a development authority that issues bonds for multifamily housing. Cobb County has a housing authority that issues bonds for multifamily housing. The city of Atlanta issues bonds through Invest Atlanta for multifamily housing, but the Urban Residential Financial Authority of the City of Atlanta provides bonding for multifamily housing. DeKalb County, as has been mentioned, has multiple issues. We have DeKalb County Development Authority issuing bonds for multifamily housing, and we have the Housing Authority of DeKalb County issuing bonds for multifamily housing. So that creates the potential for a competition among these various authorities where a developer would potentially work to get the best deal from a competing authority. And we also have the issue that says the funding of the authority, if it is dependent upon a percentage of the bond issuing value, that could also create some challenges. Now, the good thing about it is if we can have the Department of Audits and Accounts do an updated study, and we can do a joint House Senate study committee moving forward, and we can work in partnership with the economic developers of Georgia, the local economic developers of Georgia, and Georgia Department of Economic Development. I think we can work to resolve these issues, and I look forward to doing that. Senator Rett, we apologize for getting started without you, but we were rolling. Okay, we're glad you made it. Hopefully, you know, things gotten better out there. It was nasty this morning.
It was.
It was nasty. Any further comments?
One last comment about, because you brought it up, and I'll be short. You know, we've heard a lot about DeKalb County, and we're hearing a little bit about Cobb County. I would recommend that the delegation members that are in the House and the Senate of these respective counties get together and look at what local legislation could be drafted to either amend the charters of these authorities or to eliminate them. If they're not working properly, then they should do something locally in local legislation. I'm not an attorney, so there may be limitations to what you can or can't do, but I would start there first so we don't use a wide brush approach. Let's take out a small brush and try to fix the problems. If there's an issue in DeKalb County, let's focus on DeKalb County. So thank you for letting me say that.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. Yeah. And I'd like to acknowledge the fact that that was one of the suggestions that Senator Parent had in her email, where local jurisdictions address the challenges that they face within their communities. And I think that would be true of any number of counties, not just Cobb or DeKalb. We might look at metro counties and look at the challenge that metro counties face that are unique to Georgia.
Thank you.
Senator Rett?
I agree with the leader. You know, do you look at things from a micro or macro perspective? Do you look at it from a local or a state perspective? Just like I forgot the county they were from, small county.
Ben Hill County, Fitzgerald, Georgia, yeah.
What would work for us up here won't work for them. That's right. Just like, for example, I was working with some people discussing educational splosh. In the metro area, we could raise like $700–800 million. But in their county, they may raise 50,000.
That's right.
So I think you start at the local level first, see if you can fix it. And usually a lot of times you can work things out and use other counties who have success that are similar to yours as a model to follow.
I agree. I appreciate those insights. And you're right. I think that if you take a Ben Hill County or a Taliaferro County, I think those of you who know East Georgia and know Taliaferro County, the total population of Taliaferro County is 2,500 people. So their needs and challenges are much different from a metro community, and they have to address those. And I acknowledge and support the reality is that local decisions are the best decisions. So if we can engage our local communities in resolving these issues, then we won't be faced with the challenge of trying to create a solution for everyone. I appreciate the committee. I appreciate the work of the committee. Like I say, we will take the input. We will continue to take input, but we will now begin to draft the final report and have it available to the committee, I hope by midweek next week, and then we'll do a Zoom meeting for formal adoption, and I'll submit the report to the Lieutenant Governor. If there is no further business.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion is adjourned. Thank you very much.
I like my meetings.
Thank you.